Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is red.olaughlin. We're on the Wise Ones on the USA Global TV and USA Global TV and Radio Network. Worldwide audience, that's why good morning, good afternoon, good evening. No matter where you are in the world, we're there to help you. The Wise Ones. It's a show where people who have wisdom, and today's guest is certainly one of those, have a chance to provide that guidance, lessons learned, help improve, all sorts of things. Today's guest is probably one of the best that I'm anticipating, just doing all the research on him before he showed up here. John.miles. John.miles is a speaker, award-winning author, show host, founder, CEO, Navy veteran, runs a gamut from all sorts of things. He has a podcast that's in the top 0.1% of all the podcasts that are out there. I think it's in 169 countries, if I remember right. Anyway, John, join us, please.
Hi, Red. It's so nice to be here and such an honor.
Oh, I'm honored also. You mentioned somewhere in one of the readings I was doing, in fact, one of the things I wanted to do real quickly, because it was there, it caught my eye. You said Henry David Thoreau, the massive men lead lives of quiet desperation. I thought that was really interesting in light of your life's experiences from the corporate world, from the Navy world. I mean, you've had trauma that you talk about with regard to, I think what you said not that many years ago, you walk in your house and then you're confronted by an armed burglar and staring down the front end of a pistol. You've had trauma from combat. You've had all sorts of things. So you talk about these invisible wounds. I'm just going to let you tell whatever you want to do to get started, because that just kind of really captured my attention before we get into your podcast and the rest of everything else.
Yeah, so Red, thank you for that introduction. I think I'm going to start out by talking about that Henry David Thoreau quote. As you aptly put it, the massive men lead lives of quiet desperation. And if you look at what Gallup continually reports right now, they say out of the full-time 1.2, 1.3 billion workers in the world, over 900 million of those 1.2, 1.3 feel unfulfilled. And I say we are often best served to serve the person that we once were. And I definitely had become one of those 900 million who felt unfulfilled by what I was doing. And it happened when most people would have thought I would have been at the pinnacle of my career. I was at the time serving as a CIO for a Fortune 50 company and reached a point as I was going through 100-hour weeks, traveling 50% of the time to overseas locations, just dealing with politics, inter-office strife, myriad of HR issues from the thousands of employees that I had globally, that I just reached this state of complete and utter numbness that I wouldn't have wished on anyone, and quite frankly, couldn't believe had allowed myself to accumulate into. And I think what happens to so many of us who reach this state is all of a sudden we reached this climax where I remember getting out of bed, putting my feet on the floor, and just thinking to myself, nothing that I am doing holds any significance. I am not changing lives. I didn't feel like I was making a significant difference to the world. And ultimately, I felt this profound sense of desperation that had kicked in, where I had spent up to this point 20 years of my career making other people's dreams come true, making a lot of shareholders and board members a lot of money, but I wasn't enriching my own life and I wasn't serving people like I felt called to serve. And so for me, that was really the starting point of trying to find a way to rebuild my life in a different way, where I was doing things that uplifted other people, that served humanity in a better and more purposeful way. And it was the starting point to me eventually creating Passion Struck, the podcast, the book, and everything that I do now. But I tell this because I think there are so many millions of people out there who felt exactly the way that I felt. You reach this point that I refer to in self discrepancy theory, where you've got these three versions of yourself: your actual self, which is who you are at this moment, your ought self, which is who you think you should be based on societal expectations, what you've been taught over your life. And then you have this version of yourself, your ideal self, which is who you could become. And I had reached this point at that stage where I had manifested myself into my ought self, who I thought I should become. Uh, and that version of me was so far removed from the ideal self that I truly wanted to become, that quiet desperation kicked in. And so since then, I have been really studying over the past decade, how do you cross that chasm from the ought self so many of us have become to becoming that ideal self that, if we could choose to do it, we could unlock. And I just want to add one last thing here to kind of anchor this point in. Psychologist Tom Gilovich, who's a professor at Cornell, has been doing research over the past decade on this and longer, and came out with this report in 2018 where they examined thousands of people who were in their third trimester of life and asked them what their biggest regret in life is. And it wasn't the mistakes in life that haunted them, it was the what ifs, the should haves. It was not pursuing becoming their ideal self. This gap that I'm talking about, where it just leads you into living life in quiet desperation and a feeling of an unmattering. And 76% felt that way. So I just express it because it is such a pervasive issue globally.
Interesting. Of those 900 million people, when you start working over 40 hours a week, 80 hours a week, depending on where you're at, sometimes you're so busy you have no ability to even know that you're numb. It just kind of becomes part of life. And I guess you kind of, at some point in time, had to sit down and say, there's something wrong, and what can you do about it? But that to me, I find to be fascinating, because most of us kind of just exist is probably a better word, exist in whatever world we're in. And then all of a sudden they knock on the door and say, it's time for you to retire. And then you're not ready and you're retired, and the whole world is different. But from what I'm seeing in your book and your podcast, the ability to take your life and transform it, I guess is probably the best word I can come up with right now, a transformative, achievable way of making a difference in your personal world. So if I'm going to impact the world, or I want to impact the world, how do I actually go about starting that process? So uh,
Well, first, I just want to comment on what you just said, because what you're describing, I think, is exactly what happens when people experience this quiet desperation or burnout or any of these things that so many of us are facing in life is, to me, it starts out similar to depression. You don't just become depressed overnight. Typically, they're warning signs, but they're so subtle that you don't even realize it's occurring in the background. And what happened for me is I've looked back over my career is over time, that level of stress and dissatisfaction and sense of unmattering slowly was building up over time. And it's in the background, so it's almost negligible from one day to the other. So you don't realize that it's rising. It's kind of like a rising tide that suddenly goes over your seawall. And for me, there was kind of a hockey stick kind of moment where it went from being at a mid severity to full out severity. And I think that's what happens to a lot of people is this grows in the background and we don't even realize it's happening. So, in order to break free from this, the first thing that I want people to understand is, as I described, it took a long time for me to reach this point. So, thinking that I'm going to be able to go from this state to where I want to be overnight is just an impossible thing to happen. Because just as it took a long time for this to occur, it's going to take time for you to break free from it. So what I ended up doing is I ended up seeking a career coach who was also a psychologist who had me start thinking about this metaphor of seeing myself sitting on a stool like the one I'm actually sitting on doing this interview. And he had me think about the base that's underneath the stool that had multiple supports. And for me, one of those supports had become way over leveraged compared to the other ones that were underneath me, and that was the constant grind. And because it was so leveraged, other elements that were holding me up were starting to fall apart. And he said, I want you to imagine creating this ideal stool for yourself and putting whatever supports underneath it you want to be there as you rebuild your life. And anyone who's listening or watching right now, they could be anything that you would want. I chose to make them my physical health, mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, relationship health, and financial health. And so as I started to examine those, I needed a starting point to reorient my life. And for me, it was definitely my mental health. As you mentioned at the beginning of this show, I had had a number of different traumas significantly impact me throughout life. And one thing that I learned during the era that I was in the military, especially with the security clearances that I held, was that I was warned time and time again not to seek mental health assistance, not to tell anyone that I was experiencing PTSD or that I was struggling because there was a worry that they would remove you from your unit, that you wouldn't go on deployments, that they would take your security clearances away. And so I ended up suppressing so much of the trauma that had impacted me throughout my life and had put it in the background. And when I had that altercation with the intruder who was in my house and was faced with a gun pointing at me, it kind of unearthed not only that immediate trauma, but all the past trauma. And I found that if I wasn't willing to get through the stuck points that were sitting there in the background, I was never going to be able to move forward in the way that I wanted to lead my life. And so I embarked on 2 years of just intensive therapy, doing things like cognitive processing therapy, EMDR, uh, prolonged exposure therapy, and other medicinal ways to try to deal with it. And once I rid myself of those stuck points that were holding me back, I not only released them, but crazy thing happens, I have found. When you start bettering one area of your life, you naturally start bettering other areas of your life at the same time. And I started to see improvements in all areas that I was trying to improve. And I ended up finding that there were 12 major principles or reasons that I employed to help me get through this. And those ended up becoming the 12 principles that I outline in my book, Passion Struck, that helped me rebuild my life and rebuild it really from the ground up. So, my advice to anyone listening is you really need to pick a starting point to get a center of gravity. And from there, you can then use that to make headway there and then to start doing supplemental focus areas once you create those pillars for the school that you want to become your ideal self.
Passion Struck. Why that title?
Well, I have to tell you, Red, if I would have looked at this back in 2021, the beginning of the year, I would have told you the word had never even crossed my mind. I happened to be talking to a friend of mine, Keith Crotch, who the viewers and listeners may know or may not know. I've known Keith now for about 25 years, and I first met him when he started a company called Reba, which he sold off to SAP. He then became the chairman and CEO of DocuSign, and most recently, he was the Assistant Secretary of State under Mike Pompeo. And Keith and I were having a discussion, and I was telling him about the transformation that I had not only seen in my own life, but I had observed in other luminaries that we tend to think of as different than us. People like Dwayne The Rock Johnson, Bono, Derek Jeter, Oprah, etc. And I said it's as if something happens and a light bulb clicks, and all of a sudden you go from feeling stuck or being stuck in wherever you are to all of a sudden having this unleashed fervor inside of you that you're so passionate about pursuing this problem that you think that you are uniquely capable of solving, that you're willing to forego financial risk, relationship risk, job loss, whatever it takes to achieve it. And Keith just looked at me and he said, John, I think what you're describing is someone who goes from being stuck in their life to becoming passion struck. And when I heard it, the light bulb just went off. And I think, as anyone would do, I eagerly went to GoDaddy, never expecting in a million years that the domain would actually be there. And I think sometimes there's divine intervention where the universe is just willing something to happen, and I go and it was still there. So I quickly got the domain, trademarked it, and the rest is history.
Interesting. Now, I took a look at that, and that's interesting. It must be a story behind it. I'm glad you shared that with us. But as you go through those 12 things, you're looking at, I guess from a fear and a self-doubt base, and then you're going up to some level of self-improvement with goals and transitioning and progress and learning from failures and all sorts of stuff. So, what do you think the best way for somebody to get started on their own self-improvement? Obviously, they can buy the book, but if you were giving somebody, in 1 minute, tell me what, how do I really make that first step incrementally? How do I start?
Well, I think it's what I had previously described to you. I encourage people to think of their life on the stool that they're on today and the support structure that's underneath it, and how balanced or imbalanced is that? And then think about the metaphor of a stool that you can craft to be your desired state. And if you could have it be any pillars underneath that stool, what would they be? And then it becomes, how do you bridge that chasm between the two? And it's interesting. I interviewed on my podcast a gentleman named Andreas Widmer, who is the leader of the business school, the Iacocca Business School American at the American Catholic University in Washington, D.C. And I was talking to Andreas about his earlier life, and he grew up in Switzerland, and really had no direction when he was younger. And his parents encouraged him to apply to become a Swiss Guard. And he never thought in a million years they would select him. And Andreas is this towering figure. He's probably 6'7", 6'8" tall, big guy. But he gets selected, and before he knows it, he is now one of the chief guardians of Pope John Paul II. And he told me some amazing things about the Pope, that when you were in his presence, it was as if the rest of the world melted away. And it was as if he could see right into your soul. And Andreas said that he would mentor him. And one day he was having a conversation with him, and he said, Andreas, I can tell that inside you're lost. You don't understand what your purpose is. You don't know what you're meant to do here on earth. And he said that you were put here for a unique reason. You have gifts that no one else on earth has, and every one of us is unique in our own way. So what you need to do is spend the time in isolation, self-reflection, to understand what are those gifts that truly light you up inside, that bring you joy, and then how can you exploit them to solve a problem that you see others suffering from, that you're uniquely positioned to undertake, where you can go out and use your unique skills to make the world a better place. And that to me, once you create that new structure of those pillars underneath that stool that I was talking about, is then doing the self work to identify what are those unique skill sets you have, and then how can you apply them to the world to make it better. And I use in the first principle of my book the metaphor of being a mission angler. And I picked this on purpose because I live here in Tampa Bay, Florida, where we have some incredible fishing. And all the anglers that I know who are going out on the mission to do the best catch that they can, what they end up doing is they're very methodical about how they approach that task. They're thinking about the tides, they're thinking about the moon phases, when they need to leave, what the sun is going to be like, where they need to go to find the most plentiful catches. They're typically using a fish finder. They're picking specific bait, meaning everything that they're doing is extremely intentional. And what I find is that so many of us today don't approach our life in an intentional way. And a lot of people make the statement that you live your life on autopilot. And I think it's the wrong metaphor for what people are doing in society today, because even if you're on autopilot, the pilot is still putting the plane in a positive direction. I think the better metaphor for how so many people are living today is if they're a pinball in the game of pinball and they're distracted by everything that's around them. They end up letting the game play them instead of being intentional about learning how to play the game and master it. And I think it's a great analogy to our lives, where the pinball game is our life and all the distractions that are emerging, especially with social media and the digital world that we live in. And is that is hindering us from being intentional because we're so distracted by everything that's going on. So it's really doing that self work to figure out what is your daily life like? What are the things that are hindering you and keeping you in this pattern of being like a pinball? And then taking the steps, like I said before, to imagine what your life could be, start focusing on one area that you can improve upon, start doing self reflection to understand what your unique skill sets are, then searching for something that you can help society better, and start altering your life over time.
Okay, so self-reflection is a good starting point. But if I have a lot of self-doubt, the doubt's probably going to be much greater than the other one and probably not allow any progress. We all have failures, and sometimes we don't learn as much as we should from them. So as I'm looking at transitioning to what I want to be, I have to be able to also overcome that self-doubt, that fear of the unknown, fear of a lot of things. And sometimes those are very difficult. But I noticed in your book that you talk about having a mission, of being able to get yourself oriented in the direction you need to go in. I don't think many people have a mission, personal mission. We might have a business mission, but it's not us. Uh, how how would you recommend somebody develop a personal mission?
Well, one of the easiest ways you can do it is to develop a vision board. And this is something that I've utilized significantly. And I look for images of the things that I want to manifest in my life, and I assemble them all on a board that I put in my office that I can look at daily to think about the goals that I'm shooting for in my life. I think the other thing is I highly recommend starting to journal. And I know a lot of people say this, and a lot of people have tried it and it doesn't work. And I thought it was just as hokey as the rest of you. But after you get into a routine of doing it, even if the first couple days you're sitting there and you can't think of anything for 5 or 10 minutes, it's okay. That's the starting point that a lot of us have, is staring at a blank sheet. But I encourage you just to start jottling down whatever you can think of. What's been helpful for me is to get into a pattern where I do a series of common tasks every single day, meaning, what are 4 or 5 things that I'm grateful for? What are 4 or 5 things that I would like to manifest in my life? Then I go down, what are some goals that I've set for myself and how well am I achieving those goals? Then I set out new goals that I want to achieve, and I start thinking about those and the steps that I have to do to achieve them. And then I'm a big believer in meditation. So I typically do those things first thing in the morning and then go out on a walk with my dog, where I don't listen to any music or anything. I just sit in a state of meditation and think about what I've journaled and what is working in my life, what isn't, what I'm grateful for, what I'm not. And I try to experience the world by focusing on my different senses. What am I smelling? What am I hearing? What am I seeing? Trying to really get into allowing my mind to be fully present in the moment, so I'm at one with myself and in a deep state of intentional thinking and desiring of how I want to live that day, how I want to live that week, and how do I want to pursue the goals that I've laid out in that vision board.
I like that. That makes a lot of sense. It really does. Most of us don't take time just to go walk with a dog or without a dog. And if we're listening to music, we're missing smelling the roses, so to speak. But that fresh air and sunshine certainly is a very good health option that it's free and we don't take advantage of it. Uh, you talk about your shows being the alternative, healthy, the alternative health option or something like that for your podcast.
It's it is the number one alternative health podcast
That,
on a very consistent manner.
yeah,
It's kind of
that's what.
myself or Lewis Howe's School of Greatness.
Uh, so tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah, so yeah, I guess everyone has a reason for why they start a show, and would have told you I'd never in a million years thought I would be a podcast host, and even if I had become one, never did I think I would be very successful at it. However, I applied what led me to success in the business world to how I approach the podcast. And the reason I started it is because I had found this mission that I wanted to help people realize that they matter. And I didn't know how to accomplish it, but I knew I wanted to help people at scale. So I was going down the path originally of wanting to write a book, and I started to talk to book agents. Every one of them was rejecting me. And for better or for worse, I guess better, they were all telling me similar things, meaning you were this Fortune 50 senior executive, and that's how people look at you, but you don't really have a personal brand. You don't have any social accounts. You don't have any way to magnify what you want to talk about. And how do you even know anyone is going to pay attention to anything that you want to teach them? And they encouraged me to go out and publicly speak about it. And at this time, it was right when COVID was happening, so you couldn't public speak in person. And I'm not sure what you think, but it's almost like this episode we're doing here today. When you're doing a virtual presentation, it's very difficult to assess the audience's reaction because you can't see them. So I just thought that the best way for me to amplify the message and see if any of it's resonating or to take two paths. One is to start blogging about it. And so I started to do that on my own personal website, which now has about 200 articles on it. And I also started doing it on Medium. And at the same time, I decided to start the podcast. And I spent about 6 months researching podcasts, listening to as many as I possibly could, and then decided that initially it was going to be in the self improvement or education space. In about 6 months in, I reevaluated everything because I wasn't getting the results that I was looking for. And what I found was that I had done so much studying of other podcasts that I was really emulating what I saw other hosts doing instead of being my authentic self on the podcast. And so I reoriented the whole podcast through a different lens and made it all about behavior science. How do we conduct intentional behavior change to impact the most significant areas of our life, whether that's our physical health, mental health, kind of the different elements of the stool that I talked about. And we position it in the alternative health podcast space. And all of a sudden, the podcast just started taking off. And since that time, we've now done over 40 million downloads. And my solo episodes have consistently done better than even many of the interviews that I do. So that's kind of the story behind the podcast. But on it, I've been lucky enough to interview everyone from David Rubenstein to Seth Godin, Dr. Mark Hyman, Susan Cain, Sharon Salzberg, Rachel Hollis, Jim Quick, Dan Pink. I mean, the list goes on and on. Maria Menounos. So very fortunate that it's taken off, but I feel even more fortunate that the whole reason I do it is to help people. And the most rewarding thing that I hear from people is when the episodes speak to them personally, and that I'm actually helping to change people's lives for the better.
On your website, it says that you love to sail, boating, uh, and you live in Tampa. So tell us a little bit about why boating is one of those, really favorite things that you. How did you get so involved in that? I guess is really what I'm trying to say.
Well, I don't want to go into this too much, but I think all of us have certain astronaut astrological elements that make us up, and some of us are fire people, water people, whatever. I think I just happen to be a water person. So for me, being on the water, viewing the water, it just brings a sense of calmness and serenity in my life. If I can be on a boat, paddleboard, kayak, whatever it is, that week always seems to go better for me. And the way that this all started was as a kid growing up, we used to go to an alumni camp for the University of Michigan up on Lake Walloon in Upper Michigan. And one of my father's favorite activities in the world was sailing. He used to sail the Mackinac Island race and a whole bunch of other races when he was younger. And I remember I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and he started teaching me how to sail sunfish and butterflies, and then eventually got me into lightnings. And then I got into bigger sailboats, and it just created this passion inside of me. And then when I went to the Naval Academy, I sailed on the offshore sailing team, and now in Tampa. This year I wasn't able to do it as much, but I typically participate in Friday night races in St. Pete, and then in the races on Davis Island on Thursday nights. And there's just something about the wind in your face, being out there, especially to see the sunset, the team coordination that goes on when you're racing, and just this feeling that it's you and nature, and just this exhilarating sense of accomplishment just overcomes me. And it's just always been a love to be around water.
Another passion.
Yep,
Okay,
definitely a passion of mine.
getting ready to wrap up the show here in a couple minutes or so. Um, your podcast, who would be a good participant, uh, international speaking, keynote speaking, things like that? What do you have to offer people? How do they get in touch with you? And why don't you just let us know those details?
Well, thank you for that, Red. It's very kind of you to ask those questions. So I mentioned some big guests earlier on the show, and I guess you kind of have to have those big guests to make your show popular. But my favorite thing to do on the show is to highlight everyday heroes, because to me this whole concept of becoming passion struck, it's not just reserved for people like Jeff Bezos and Oprah Winfrey and Elon Musk and some of the other people that I've mentioned. It's something that each and every one of us can create in our own life. And the perfect example that I have of people I like to highlight are everyday heroes who are walking among us, making a difference in the world. A great example of this is a couple weeks ago, I had uh, Noam Platt on the show, who is an architect who specializes in creating unique apparatus for disabled children. He's got a PhD in assistive technologies, and he has been doing this incredible work for this organization, Makers Making Change, where he makes these adaptive technologies, everything from toilet seats to specialized walkers for kids missing limbs to other things to better the lives of people with disabilities. And I mean, he told me a great thing on the show. He goes, none of these kids want to feel like they're disabled. The issue is the world doesn't make it easy for disabled people to feel like they're normal. So he is trying to bring normalcy to people's lives. And this organization that he's with has chapters all over the world. And so I chose to feature him on the show because not only did I want to focus the work of Noam, but I wanted to give airtime to that organization because I think that they're doing tremendous work that's benefiting so many thousands of people globally to make their lives better. So that is the perfect type of story I like to have on, is someone who's using their unique skills to make the world a better place. You know, ideally, I like to do it through the lens of alternative health, behavior change, those things. So I have had a ton of psychologists, behavior scientists on the show as well. And if you want to learn more about me, you can go to John.miles. R is my middle initial, miles.com. That's my personal website. If you want to learn more about Passion Struck, you can go to passionstruck.com. There you can find more about the podcast, the book, which you can purchase on Amazon. And you can find me on all the social platforms of John.miles, where I post daily.
Okay, so if somebody has an interest in being on your podcast, they go to passionstruck.com. And if they're interested in contacting you, be a keynote speaker or in some other capacity, they go to your website and click on the contact me. So that's John.miles, miles.com. Last word before we leave. Anything that you should have said you didn't, that wrap up in 20 seconds or so?
Yeah, Greg, you brought up something earlier that we have a lot of self-doubt. The thing that I would want to tell everyone who's listening is the thing you have to realize when you look in the mirror every single day, that the image that's looking back at you is the most gifted, unique, incredible person that you will ever meet on this earth, because you are unique in your own way. Now, the person that you're looking at in that mirror is also your biggest critic. And so you have to realize the inherent gifts that you have, and that you have the power to exploit them and to create the life that you desire to have, and to feel like you're mattering to the world and making a difference. But it all starts with you realizing how unique you are and that you matter.
Fantastic. I appreciate that. Thank you, John. I really appreciate your time today and look forward to coming back again in the future. And with that, I'm going to bid you adieu and catch you later on. This is Red O'Laughlin. We're ending the session today on the Wise Ones on the USA Global TV and Radio Network. And in about 16 minutes, I will be hosting the show called Talking Heads. We started a new series last week on helping new authors get started. We are going to part two, for lack of a more definitive um, topic for today. We talked about last time. How do you actually get started? Well, we're going to continue on that starting mode. And it's a lot easier than people think, but sometimes we just don't even think about what those options are. So please join me in 15 minutes or so, or catch it on the YouTube archives of the USA Global TV and Radio Network. Red O'Laughlin, catch you all next week. Bye now.
USA Global TV and Radio proudly presents our partner and sponsor, Mr. Philip Sykes and the British School of Excellence. Building confidence, changing lives. And now, proudly presenting the Polished Professional.
On a transformative journey with the British School of Excellence's comprehensive suite of masterclasses, crafted to elevate your professional and personal life. 8 outstanding modules will elevate you to the next level. Module 1, Exploring Life's Purpose, delves into the depths of self-discovery, guiding you to chart your unique path to fulfillment and success. Module 2, Mastering Professional Presence and Confidence. This masterclass is a deep dive into the art of self-assurance and commanding presence, which is essential for standing out in today's competitive landscape. Module 3, Learn the secrets of visual impact, how to curate a personal style that amplifies your professional brand. Module 4, Mastering Professional Etiquette and Communication Excellence, navigating the nuances of corporate interaction with grace and tact. Module 5, Elegance in Eloquence. We impart powerful techniques to captivate and persuade any audience with your oratory skills. Module 6, Unlock the potential of your emotional intelligence, EQ, and harness the ability to connect, empathize, and lead with emotional savvy. Module 7, Mastering DISC, building a gateway to understanding behavioral styles, fostering better personal and professional relationships. Module 8, Mastery in Dining Etiquette, building your confidence to perfect the subtleties of dining with finesse, enhancing your social savviness at any table. Step into the Polished Professional program, where poise, elegance, and excellence aren't just taught, they're instilled for life. Join us to redefine your potential and polish your professional edge.
To learn more, go to thebritishschoolofexcellence.com. The British School of Excellence are investors in people. Let us invest in you.
USA Global TV and Radio, in partnership with Dr. Jacalyn LLC, present Amazon #1 best-selling author, Dr. Jacalyn Kerbeck. Dr. Jacalyn Kerbeck is a certified life, career, and executive coach who teaches people how to listen at an elevated level through her courses and her books. Dr. Kerbeck teaches her clients how to open their hearts and express themselves through their creative genius. In her children's book series, The Amazing Adventures of Lady Ella, the listening mentor, Dr. Kerbeck teaches children and their families how to listen at an elevated level. Dr. Kerbeck has worked with clients across the world to guide them in how to express themselves and communicate at a highly effective level. Join our team of elevated listeners so you can listen without judgment, without providing a solution, without interruption, and without stealing the stage. To order your books today, go to drjacalyn.com or Amazon.